that you abolished the diaper tax.
The thing is, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. Every single one is different.
And you're the dean of the School of Communications at Quinnipiac University
because it's allowed me to understand education.
I started traveling the country, just training people to understand these disabilities.
That was one of the reasons why I brought you on to discuss that.
Monday night, 8 p.m. EST.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Monday Night Pamela Roth Live. You are now tuning in to episode number 21. So let me tell you a little bit about tonight's guest. I will introduce you to Gina Mundy. Gina is an attorney specializing in childbirth cases. And what's interesting is many attorneys get involved when there is a death or there's a problem with a baby being born afterwards. And Gina actually gets involved during the pregnancy to ensure safe pregnancy and safe delivery. So without further ado, and by the way, too, Gina has authored a book, A Parent's Guide to Safer Childbirth. This book is not only found nationally, but it's also international. And Gina has helped women all around the world have a safer childbirth and safer delivery. So from here on out, we are going to be speaking with Gina Mundy.
Hi, Pamela.
Hi, how are you? Good morning. Good evening. I think I was on the time today. So nice to have you. It's very nice to have you here. So of course, we're both attorneys, but everything is going to be focused on you and your practice. How did you get involved as an attorney specializing in childbirth cases?
I wish I had a better story. First job out of law school, and having a baby was on my radar because I had been married two months beforehand.
Right. And
so I was looking for a new job. And when I was hired into a team of over 20 people. And that's all we did were these childbirth cases. And as you mentioned in the intro, I mean, when there's a childbirth case, that means baby was not born healthy. Baby may have passed during childbirth. And then in some sad cases, mom passed away during childbirth. So yeah, since having a baby was on my radar, I wanted to make sure nothing like that happened in my, the birth of my babies.
Now, also, you are a plaintiff attorney or a defense attorney?
Defense attorney. I've been a defense attorney since first case was February 2003. So that means I'm the attorney for the doctors, the delivery team, the midwives, the residents, the nurses, and so forth.
So whereas my background, my training as a plaintiff attorney, if there was a case that had to be brought for a wrongful birth, wrongful death case, any type of medical malpractice, I would be representing the mother and the family.
Yeah, you'd be my opponent.
Right. I'd be your opponent. Just so this way the audience understands, who wears what hats, plaintiff and defendant, defense attorney. So in your years of experience, what brought you to writing the book that I had mentioned of A Parent's Guide to Safer Childbirth?
That's a great question because it's one of those moments that stops you in your tracks. And basically, we had my niece who was having the first baby of our next generation. And during the birth of her baby, we went about 20 minutes not knowing whether baby was going to be okay or not. So obviously then that means something went wrong. And during that time, I was 1,100 miles from the hospital that day. I couldn't get up there. But instead, I listened to my sister, her mom, cry over the phone hysterically for 20 minutes. And of course, me being the childbirth attorney, and at that point, I was 19 years deep into my job. I was trying to go like a legal analysis. My attorney brain was like, what just happened and what could have been done different? And all of a sudden, as I listened to my sister cry, I went from this attorney analysis to this human analysis. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how the families feel. Because for 19 years, the hardest part of my job, like we talked in pre-show, is sitting down with the families and talking about the day their baby was born or the day they lost their mom. And they always describe it as this transitional period. They have what happened, your life before and your life after. And there's this transition where you first find out. And it just hit me hard that day. And it was March 17th, 2021. Yeah, it hit me hard. And I stopped and I'm like, wait a minute, what if I'm not around for the birth of my grandkids? Because I have 3 kids, 19, 15, and 9. And I started to think, how I would prepare my kids for childbirth is completely different than, how a family would traditionally prepare. So assuming, the off chance I was 1,100 miles from one of my kids when they were giving birth to one of my grandkids, I started writing down what I know, because in these cases, there are reoccurring issues. There are reoccurring facts that every parent really needs to know in order to have a healthy baby. There are lessons that can be learned from these cases. As a lesson, you learn to prevent it from happening in the future. So basically, I started to write the book for my kids and then realized, wait a minute, this is a book that could help families all around the world.
How was the baby, if I may ask, your niece's baby?
So it's the introduction to the book. She is fine today.
Good.
She ended up being a healthy baby. But those words, the baby crashed, I hear a lot in my cases, and that's basically when my sister called me that day, was the baby crashed.
What does that mean?
So during childbirth or during labor and delivery, a baby will be doing okay, and then something goes wrong. And the baby, when they say the baby crashes, basically their heart rate is stopping. And if you don't get the heart rate, then obviously pumps the blood through baby, so all the organs get the necessary oxygen. So when that heart rate stops and the baby's not getting the oxygen baby needs, you don't have that long to get baby delivered before baby sustains an injury to the brain or will pass.
Well, as you and I were discussing in pre-show, I believe that must have been the terminology that would have been used when I was pregnant with my son, because I was 1 week overdue. There was no more amnio left. And I was trying to still have the baby through natural childbirth. And I remember that Friday, because he was born early into Saturday morning, that Friday when I went for the last checkup, my OBGYN said, "You're having this baby." And I said, "When?" She goes, "Today." She says, "You're a week overdue." She says, "There's no more fluid left." And so they had rushed me in, and I was still, my water never broke. I never went into labor. And I kept thinking, well, everything's going to be fine. And it wasn't until 3 a.m. when they tried everything, and they had all the machines hooked up in utero, attached to, at the time I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but attached to my son's head. And I looked over at the monitor. First, I looked at the doctor's face because she looked very frightened. I looked at her face. I looked at the monitor, and I saw from like a spike to flatlining. And although I knew what it meant, I really didn't want her to tell me what it was meaning. And she said, "You have to make a decision right now." She says, "We're either going to lose you or the baby because he's flatlining." And she says, "You have to make an immediate decision for a C-section." And so I guess the terminology would have been he was crashing, because they were going to lose one of us. And thankfully, we're both here. But if I had to make the choice, as I was telling you, I was telling her, save the baby, not me, because she could only save one of us. And it was a normal pregnancy. So when, for instance, with your niece or with the patients that you've had to deal with during, I mean, I know you represent the doctors, but when you've spoken to these, to the plaintiffs, did these individuals have a normal pregnancy throughout, and something just happened in the delivery room?
Yes. That many times they are normal pregnancies. In my niece's case, she had a healthy pregnancy. And actually, this is probably one of the scariest parts, is she was 38 weeks pregnant, and she was pretty sick, and she'd been sick for a couple of days. And my sister actually called and said, should we send Sam up to an IV clinic to get an IV? Or the other option was an emergency room where there could be sick people. We live in Michigan, it's cold. And I'm like, I appreciate the question, but if she's that sick, I need baby checked now. So she went up to, completely normal pregnancy. She just got sick. And then when she went to the hospital to have the baby checked out, baby was not doing well. So at that point, then they had to make the decision for like either C-section, or baby was doing okay enough to have a Pitocin induction. Pitocin is the drug that's used to induce mom's labor by making her uterus contract, which basically then jumpstarts the body. So she had two options. She chose a Pitocin induction. And like I talk about in my book, the number one most common fact in my cases, meaning when something goes wrong, common fact and issue, number one, Pitocin. It's in most of my cases. So obviously right from there, that's why I had this huge legal analysis. I'm like, did they increase the pit too much? Was baby baby shouldn't have had pit? There's the whole process. So, yeah, no, they're completely normal and they come in. It's again, typically something to do with Pitocin. And it's been that way since February 2003. Hence my, decision, like you said in the introduction, instead of getting involved in the aftermath of something going wrong. And I'm still a practicing attorney, so I'm still doing that. However, with my book being published, I'm hoping to get involved before childbirth, basically to help prevent these mistakes and complications and have, families have healthy babies. Because that's the thing. That's why it's devastating. Everything's fine. And then boom, they don't come home with their baby. It's awful.
No, that's heartbreaking. I can't even imagine. Like I said, in my situation, they had tried inducing me and still nothing was happening. And so that's why we had to make that emergency decision, which was really scary. Everything was going fine. I had a wonderful pregnancy. In fact, the funny thing is I didn't even know I was pregnant until after my first trimester.
Oh.
So in my head, I was like,
easy. You're lucky. I was so sick for my first trimester, my pregnancies. Wow.
I had no idea I was pregnant. And it wasn't until I was trying to put something on, getting dressed for the evening. And I was going to wear something that I had worn maybe 2 weeks ago. And all of a sudden it was getting tight. And at the time I was married, my husband was like, oh, you got to cut out those bagels in the morning. And I'm like, I'm not eating bagels every morning. But I still had no idea I was pregnant. But when I finally did find out I was pregnant, in my head, it was the shortest pregnancy because it was like I was only pregnant for 6 months because the first 3 flew by.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's funny. That's interesting.
But everything was normal until the very end. And I'm glad everything worked out. So now this is what I find really interesting. Most people, when they get pregnant, most women or couples, they don't know about all this preventative of how to go forward and have a healthy baby, other than, they'll go for their prenatal checkups, they'll take the vitamins, they'll eat properly with nutrition. But how is it that they can go ahead, as you were describing in your book, as far as planning for the childbirth, selecting the doctors, selecting the team?
Right. So listen, I've analyzed OBGYNs, the doctors who deliver babies now for 21 years, 19 when I wrote the book. But I go through my whole doctor analysis because when we go through these cases, we have to figure out, can the doctor go on the stand? Can they go in front of a jury? You can't stick a bad doctor in front of the jury. So there's a whole doctor analysis. And the doctors in these cases are so important because they head the delivery team. And so just so your audience understands, in these cases, it's the delivery team's care that is at issue and analyzed more than any other aspect of the case. Your doctor heads that team. You better have a good doctor. So I just do the whole doctor analysis, things to think about, questions to ask, and whatnot. And I believe that's chapter 4 of my book. Chapter 3 talks about the delivery team. Now, you get to pick your doctor. You don't get to pick your delivery team because the delivery team, that's the scariest part. You want the dream team. However, when you roll up to the hospital that day, you're going to get who's ever scheduled to work that day. So it's very important. That's why chapter 3 is so important because listen, you don't like your nurse. And listen, I just want to put this out there. I love my labor and delivery nurses. They are amazing humans. They show more human emotion in my cases than any other witness by far. Most of them are great and whatnot, but it's important that if you don't like your nurse, you know what to do and that you're able to switch them out. And it can be a very simple thing. Like if you ask, or we'll talk about this later, the baby advocate somebody asks for a new nurse, you simply ask for a charge nurse or a different nurse. And most of the time, you got to remember on the unit, these nurses aren't hiring and firing each other. These are big, huge hospital systems. So if you ask for a new nurse, most likely on the labor and delivery unit, they already know that nurse isn't, very good or whatnot. They probably have similar opinions as you. So, and I talk about this in the book, for instance, but there's a case, 2 nurses. One nurse had 20 years experience and literally was born to be a labor and delivery nurse. Another nurse had just finished training and figured out she hated labor and delivery and was looking for a new job. Okay, whichever nurse you get or that those patients got that day, that was luck of the draw, literally. And obviously, I don't need to probably tell you in that situation which nurse was her her care was at issue. So, but the other nurse, the born to be labor and delivery nurse, knew the other nurse was not good. That's actually how she ended up getting involved in the case, because she was watching the other nurse because she cared and she was a good nurse. But if somebody asked her, hey, will you be my nurse or get me another nurse, she would have stepped in all day long. But that born to be labor and delivery nurse cannot stick her head in your room and say, hey, if you don't like your nurse, I can get you a new one. It doesn't work that way. But if you say something, she can do what she does best and help you.
As a mother and as somebody who was pregnant at one time, I actually never knew that I could ask for different nurses if I wasn't happy. I just assumed or presumed like any other patient. Of course, I picked my own OBGYN. I was very comfortable with her. She was part of a team. And so she and the main doctor had taken care of me throughout the whole 9 months. And so I had met her and I knew her. But when everybody else was coming and going and, giving me IVs and just everything else, I had no idea that I could ask for somebody else. I just figured, something, I'm here, this is who's on call, and this is who you get. And I'm an attorney, and I didn't even know that. And I've dealt with different types of, personal injury cases. But as a soon-to-be mother, I had no idea. And I believe maybe most people don't know that either.
Yeah, I mean, I work in that. I mean, I'm their lawyer. I know. So beyond that, I can see, I do get a lot of people going, oh, that's a great point. And listen, your doctor, most likely, unless they pick up a 12-hour shift at the hospital, they're not at the hospital. They're called in to catch the baby, or they may come see you or check on you, maybe. So who is there? The people, usually your nurse or a midwife or a resident, they're the ones giving you direct care bedside. They're the ones responsible for contacting your doctor. In a lot of these cases, what happens is they don't contact the doctor in time, or they don't report accurately what's going on with you to the doctor. So if you don't like them, definitely, they have such important roles and jobs. And you know what? Maybe it's a resident you don't like. Just so you understand, there's teaching institutions. These residents, there are some really great residents, and there's some that are not, like in every single profession. But keep in mind, these are people who've had their nose in books for their whole life, and now they get out and they're practicing on mommies. Well, listen, in these hospitals and these teaching institutions, they run the show. I was beyond 21 years ago when I got my first case. I shocked. I was like, whoa, they have a lot of responsibility. So it's definitely something to keep in mind.
No, and thank you for sharing that with us. One of the other things that you had mentioned as I scanned through my notes here that I wanted to ask you is that in addition to selecting your medical team, your delivery team. Well, actually, no, you said you can't select your delivery team. You can select your doctor.
Yes. I mean, if you don't have the dream team, it's almost, you can, switch them out. But yeah, otherwise, you're not picking them. So
Can you describe one of the other, something else that jumped out at me from scanning through your book is creating a birth plan. Can you describe what that is and how does someone go about doing that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So here's my spin on the birth plan. My book, just so your audience understands, this is not your typical pregnancy book. This is not it's written for expecting parents, expecting grandparents. But listen, here's my deal with a birth plan is it's the act of preparing the plan itself, knowing and understanding that planning out your childbirth is almost impossible. If you are one of the lucky ones, congratulations. So you have to understand that childbirth, especially with what I have seen, especially if you're having Pitocin, you may need to make quick decisions and pivot. In my cases, families are literally one decision or minutes from a healthy baby. You have to be able to work with your team, pivot, and make those good decisions in order to have a healthy baby. And a birth plan helps you do that because you can spend that time at your home, researching, listening to podcasts, reading my book, calling people, and kind of just going through the different decisions that you may have to make. Because keep in mind, childbirth, labor is like one of those only times in life where it's totally cool to be in a bunch of pain. So you're in a bunch of pain. If you don't want to be in a bunch of pain, you're medicated. You're in a completely different state of mind. I had somebody refer to it the other day in a podcast as a labor bubble. I'm like, okay, yeah, great. You're in a labor bubble. I like it. So, you're like in this labor bubble, and you need to be able to mentally and mentally and physically focus and deliver your baby. So being ready and getting that plan ready is absolutely huge. Now, if you want to give the plan to your delivery team when you get there, that's great. Sure. They'll know where you're coming from and your preferences. But if you don't, that's okay. Because again, it's the act of preparing the plan, the act of preparing for childbirth that will help you have a healthy baby.
See, I feel like I'm at a loss because I actually never went through labor to know what it was like. I see it in movies. I hear it from my friends. Of course, I heard it from my mother, about like all the pain and the pushing and the yelling and the screaming. That's really the only time you can actually yell at your spouse or your mate.
That's fair. For doctors, yeah, I know.
Yell and scream at everybody, seem like, really delusional. And it's like, it's okay because you're in labor. So I never had that opportunity. But are there the dangers that can happen in delivering a baby can happen, like you said, in labor at that point as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's where you need to be able to pivot and make quick decisions. And you need to have an understanding of what those important decisions that you're making ahead of time. I even go through, going through with your doctor, different aspects, like I don't go through like a typical pregnancy book. Like I'm not going to talk about your lighting. I don't talk about music, smells. That stuff's great. And that's individually, that's fine. That's beautiful. It's going to help you relax. Definitely go through all of that. Mine is like, okay, you're going on elective, but you do choose to have an elective Pitocin induction. Okay, so I've seen those go wrong since, let's see, February 2003, like I keep saying. And then I wrote a chapter on how to have a safe Pitocin induction. So that is like, that's something you want to review and then put in your plan. Okay, I want, this is how I want my Pitocin induction to be run. And that will definitely help your team understand where you're coming from. I've been on a lot of podcasts lately where I'm talking to moms and they're on their second or third kid. Their first kid, they had their Pitocin elective induction and it was a complete nightmare. They're like, we were so lucky. The second time, they're like, they know how to do a Pitocin induction by their second kid. Well, that's not always, you shouldn't have to go through that because the first one that went wrong, listen, this is what happens in these cases. They're close calls. So if you've had that elective Pitocin induction and it was a bad experience, but your baby's okay and you're okay, you landed on the right side of a close call. My cases are when they land on the wrong side, of a close call. But yeah, no, just getting these plans ready and having an understanding of what you're walking into. Another important question is, and this comes up in the cases, again, Pitocin inductions, sometimes you have to expedite delivery because baby gets in trouble because it's not being administered correctly. Well, an important decision is if you're not going to do C-section, your baby's, far enough along where you can do a vacuum or a forceps, you have to have that conversation with your doctor ahead of time. Because in my cases, the ones who use a vacuum, if it's unsuccessful, they have to convert to a C-section. And it's those minutes where baby just goes too long without oxygen. So it's important where forceps, they don't pop off. However, vaginal trauma, not good. But again, brain damaged baby, screwed up vagina, which one? So it's literally, these are questions that, especially if you're going to do a Pitocin induction or have Pitocin in your labor, it's important. And here's the deal. Like I'm going to take that back. Every pregnant person should read that chapter on Pitocin because Sam, my niece, who I talked about, who had a Pitocin induction, that was not her plan. She did not want a Pitocin induction. She did not want a C-section. She wanted a spontaneous vaginal delivery, which I highly recommend and is not in many cases. But she didn't know anything about Pitocin because she's like, well, I don't want Pitocin. I'm not going to learn about Pitocin. Well, that in the end, that's the choice she had to make. And she got lucky and landed on the right side of a close call.
It's frightening because there's so many decisions that you have to make at the split second that's going to, impact your health and, of course, the baby's health.
Yes. And as is chapter 1, mom, you're the decision maker. Your medical team, they're your medical advisors. You make the decisions. So just keep that in mind. When they're recommending things or they're telling you something, they are completely recommendations. They can't do anything without your consent. No C-sections, no PIT, no increasing the PIT, Pitocin, we call it PIT,
Right.
Whatever it is, IV, vacuum, forceps, any kind of medical intervention, breaking your water, they need complete consent. They cannot just do that. Some doctors, though, talk like, this is what I'm going to do. That is not correct. Understand, to me, that's a red flag, by the way. If they're telling you this is what you should do, I recommend this based upon my professional experience and whatnot. This is what I recommend that you do, and this is why. That's what an appropriate conversation looks like.
But that's also what's called informed consent.
100%.
Right. Because I know in my situation, I had to sign that consent form seconds before they were wheeling me into the delivery room. I had to consent to that emergency C-section. So it wasn't just verbal. They had to explain everything to me, and I had moments to make a decision. But a lot of people have to understand that, and I'm glad you brought that up. As far as consent goes, has to be written consent, because God forbid if anything does go wrong in the future, that piece of paper is going to be coming out whether or not you sign that consent form.
Oh, they always do. They do. So for sure.
So one of the other things I want to ask you about is, like you were speaking about a C-section. Majority of the patients, excuse me, the clients that you have deposed in your cases, was it the C-section was a decision at the last moment because of possibly the pit level, or was it something? I know a lot of women choose to have a C-section, early into their childbirth. Actually,
Right.
early into their pregnancy, I should say.
I got you. Right. So yeah, you're talking. So right, the 39-week elective C-section.
Mhm.
I talk about this in the book. That baby lawyers typically do that because it's the lowest risk to baby, and we really have a hard time relaxing enough to deliver a baby vaginally. So yeah, that's definitely an option. But yeah, just so your audience understands, that's a great point. Most of my cases, the majority end with a C-section. If it's not a C-section, it's typically vacuum or forceps, which is called a operative vaginal delivery. But yeah, that's how most end. So that's why it's so important to have an understanding of all of those and what they entail and whatnot. So absolutely.
So majority of the cases that you've seen over your years, what would be the main reason for the problems during delivery in childbirth? Is it always the pit level, or was it something else?
It could be Pitocin. So Pitocin's in almost all of my cases, but it may not be the main issue in the case. So it's usually how it's administered. That's a problem. So I go through chapter 14, and in summary, I am a slow and steady, hit your sweet spot kind of chick when it comes to Pitocin. And a lot of doctors are like that. And that's great. They're going to love chapter 14. The problem is there's other doctors that do not share that same opinion and tend to increase the Pitocin a little bit faster. So, but that's typically, when something goes wrong, you need, as a mom, your body needs time to respond to the Pitocin, and Pitocin is a very individualized drug. So nobody knows how your body's going to respond to it if you've never been on it. So just very careful administration is important. Yeah. And there's different things, nurses, if you're a Pitocin induction, your nurse should only have one person out doing a Pitocin inductions because they are tricky. Personally, I like a nurse with more experience when it comes to a Pitocin induction too. But yeah, so that's huge with Pitocin. And then in terms of Pitocin not being maybe a direct issue, I mentioned this in the book. So sometimes a baby's shoulder will get hung up in the birth canal. It's called a shoulder dystocia. Right. So Pitocin is usually involved in those cases, but what becomes an issue in the case is more of, dislodging the baby's shoulder and whatnot. That's usually the issue in the case, is not so much the Pitocin. So it doesn't always have to be the direct issue.
Was Pitocin an issue in majority of your cases?
Oh, 100%. But it is by far. So here's what I was going to say earlier, and I know I kind of clumped it in with a long-winded answer, but this is so incredibly important if you are an expecting parent. And listen, grandparents, if you have kids, tell them about my book. I wrote this book, and I'll tell you, grandparents are loving my book, and it makes sense because I wrote it to have healthy grandkids. So, it's very important. We had to circle back around. What was the end of that question? It's my long.
I was gonna say, if I had my court report, I'd say I need to read back.
I know, right? As lawyers would be like, can you repeat the question? Actually, I got it. I got it right now. You asked me if Pitocin was in the majority
Yes,
of cases. It's like the simplest question too, right? But of course, I can't just say yes. With that said, because you start with Pitocin, and what happens is it's almost like a cascade of medical interventions that kind of typically follow. Like moms typically get an epidural because the contractions are so strong. And that's really how the cases typically progress. However, and this is what I keep trying to say, the best thing you can do as a parent or tell your kids or whatever is spontaneous vaginal birth with no medical intervention. That is, there are so many, or there's just a few of those cases. Those cases are few and far between. So that by far is the best way you can go. Now, families like to get excited. Mom, I get it. I had 3 kids. I was exhausted. And if someone said 39-week Pitocin induction and I didn't know what I knew, I might be like, yes, just please, let's just deliver the baby. So, and you know what? And if you're there, that can be a great option. Just make sure you reach chapter 14. But what I keep trying to say is when the mistakes are made, when there are complications, the drug Pitocin, majority of the time is in the cases.
And when you say spontaneous vaginal childbirth, are you calling that like what's considered like a regular childbirth?
All natural, baby.
Okay.
Skip the drugs.
No drugs, a lot of screaming.
Yep. Don't keep moving. Basically, no Pitocin, no epidural, are probably like the two main things. If you can skip those, and just go for a natural childbirth where you also naturally go into labor, your body is ready. That definitely by far is the best way to go.
I remember they asked me if I wanted an epidural, and after they explained that it was an injection near my spine or in my spine, I was like, absolutely not. I didn't want anything like that.
I have a chapter on epidurals, and I had one case, and I go through it in the book. I can't disclose anything, it's very general in the case, but I wrote that chapter almost for the family because I never ever want to see this happen again. But yeah, I can't really disclose. And I mention her in the book, but it's just so tragic. It's very tragic. So so again, lesson learned from the baby case. Let's prevent this from happening in the future. This is what you need to know because they are sticking something into your spine in the epidural space. Usually it's good, but there's just definitely certain things you need to know.
Now, I wanted to keep things as natural as I could when I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to have anything invasive. There were just so many things. I mean, I remember taking, the neonatal vitamins, anything like that, and watching the nutrition. But when it came to any sort of medication, I wasn't even happy when they were trying to induce me. I just wanted to have everything done naturally, but just, my body wasn't cooperating. I remember one of the questions was when the doctor said to me, she goes, did your water break? And I looked at her very seriously. I was like, how do I know if my water broke?
Oh,
because it was like a first time mom, and she thought it was pretty funny. She goes, how many degrees you have? I go, none in getting pregnant and childbirth.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. I know what you're saying. By the way, because you just said that, this is so incredibly important. And this is a chapter in my book. It's the common mistakes, the common issues and facts in my cases when mistakes are made. But I'll tell you, when there are complications and there are mistakes, it is always after mom's water breaks. So if your doctor, again, recommends, he's not telling you, he's recommending, hey, let's break your water, you must respond with, is there a medical reason for it, or do you want to be home for dinner?
It's a good point. Because I've actually heard that. I've seen, of course, you see that in TV shows, but I've actually heard that from people too, where, the doctor broke my water because it didn't break on its own. And in my case, my water never broke. And then apparently there was nothing in there anyway. But, it's just a weird question to be asked. And again, if you're a first time mom to be, so many of these questions just seem so commonplace that you don't know how to answer them. And I didn't want to give I didn't know if there was a right or wrong answer, because it was kind of embarrassing to say like, no, my water didn't break, but how would I know if it did? I didn't know what to expect.
No, I mean, that's a good question. And you know what? I'll tell you, probably my book's not going to tell you that. I mean, my book's going to tell you that baby is nice and comfy in the fluid if you have some. So typically baby is nice and comfy. So keeping that fluid intact during labor, like kind of protects your baby. But people, unless you do what I do, don't realize that. I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. So everybody that I talk to is like, I didn't realize that was such an important thing. And I'm like, from what I've seen, it's extremely, extremely important. So my book would be more of the decision to make that and how to make a good decision. But if you want to learn, what does that mean with the fluid running down your legs, you're going to have to read a different pregnancy book or Google it.
Okay.
So but I'm telling you, this is not your ordinary pregnancy book by any means.
Now, again, do you have the book handy to show it, to hold it up?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, perfect.
I've had it in my.
Thank you. I want to show our audience the book, and it's called A Parent's Guide to Safer Childbirth by Gina Mundy. Gina, where can our audience get this book? Both moms-to-be, families, and grandparents.
The best place is always, my default place by far is going to be my website, where it's almost like click on the book. Here's where you can buy them, especially if this is something you're listening to a year or two later. Gina Mundy, GinaMundy.com will always have a bunch of great information for families and how to get my book. But right now, probably the easiest place that most people do is they just go on Amazon and type in Gina Mundy in the search bar and everything pops up.
Now, in the 21 years since your first case, I have an interesting question for you. Have you seen anything change and improve through childbirth and delivery, or are you still seeing majority of the same errors and omissions being made?
That is a great question. It's the same. That's why I wrote the book. So I'm hoping to change it. And listen, here's the deal. Different doctors, different decisions, different recommendations. Doctors do not agree. When we kept talking about Pitocin, I would have a case come in. I'd have to hire two experts, two OBGYNs who were not involved in the care of the patient, but are coming in to review the records and tell me whether the care was good care or bad care. The one OB I would hire, the first one, would tell me everything was done perfectly. The second OB will come in and tell me everything was done wrong. They don't agree on anything. So everybody is always, there's guidelines for them to follow, but every pregnancy, every patient is completely different. So, it's an interesting question. And unfortunately, the answer is it's still happening. But again, that's why I wrote the book. So to put awareness out there, because if parents are aware of these issues, it will help activate their intuition to make sure they can make those good decisions. And I know in pre-show we talked about Baby Advocate, but we didn't get it out here. But real quick, Baby Advocate, I have chapter 7 on Baby Advocate. And that's basically dads. Until my book, I get it. There's not a lot out there where it'll teach you how to advocate for your wife, how to advocate for your baby. Don't just roll up and pay. They call it, I guess, a lot of labor and delivery nurses. They tell me the dads play Candy Crush and they sit there and they don't do anything, or they're off in the corner texting or doing whatever. No. Don't do that. That's if dads in these cases stepped in as the advocate for mom and baby and knew what was in my book. But in the cases, if the dad was more involved and had a better understanding, I can tell you firsthand, there would be a lot of different outcomes. And maybe they wouldn't have had to meet somebody like me. So again, I go through a whole chapter on having like a baby advocate, having the husband like step in. And if he knows what's in my book, it's going to make it so it'll help him bring his wife and his baby home at the end of the day.
Because, it's funny that you mentioned that, because majority of the times dads, or I can even think like during my pregnancy, I would say 99% of the time when I was going for all the checkups throughout, I was always by myself. Either he was at work, or he was downstairs in the car in front of a fire hydrant, because New York City can't find a place to park by any of the hospitals.
Yeah.
So, he was very active when he was in the delivery room with me or waiting, to see what was going to happen for my final decision. But at that point, all the decision making really fell on me.
Oh, 100%. It is ultimately you, But again, you're in that different state of mind. Mom's in a little bit of different state of mind. So having a baby advocate, and listen, I talk about this. If dad can't do it, stick grandma on it. Grandmas make, soon to be grandmas, make the best advocates because they've already been through it. And we're, I know for me, the grandma generation, we're definitely more direct on it. I feel like sometimes the generation, under us, the ones who are starting to give birth, they're like, well, we don't want to offend our OBGYNs. And I'm like, okay, let me tell you how to respond to that. I'm like, first of all, if you are uncomfortable with something, just show my book, throw me under the bus. If it's in my book, if it's not, don't do that. But, they're just so worried about offending somebody. And I'm like, listen, keep in mind that if you're anything like me, when I was a kid, when I was a child, I played with baby dolls and I dreamed of that day my baby was going to be born. I mean, this was just a huge, I dreamt of the day my entire life. So do not be, nervous to say something to a doctor, say something to a nurse or, whatnot. But dads can come in. And again, if they know what's in my book, they have an understanding of what's in my book, they're going to help their wife make those good decisions together, even though, yes, she is it. But you know what? And listen, guys, that's hot. Okay. Not kidding you. To be an advocate for your wife, to be there to protect your wife, instinctually, that's what you should want to do. I mean, go for it. Protect her. No, let her know you have her back. And guess what? She's going to relax and she's going to get baby out a lot faster and your life's going to be a lot easier.
As opposed to, why did you say this and why didn't you do that afterwards?
Oh yeah. It's sad. It's a huge lesson from these cases. Dads, step in and protect your family.
Now, with the cases that you had, do a majority of these babies survive with defects or they don't survive after delivery?
Gosh, I hate that question. Sorry. That's, I'm trying to get involved before childbirth. Those are always hard. I've had a lot of babies pass lately from childbirth, and that's been really hard. But I do have some cases where I have, severely brain damaged babies, maybe some babies that are actually, we're trying to get some stuff in, but maybe they're kind of okay. Unfortunately, a lot of my cases have been the baby passing, and that just kills me because the moms describe it as like their heart, their body does not understand that their baby is not with them. I mean, there's been one mom, she carried her baby's ashes with her. It's awful. It's nothing. And it's, there's just so much families can do to make sure that doesn't happen to them. So I definitely need to get ready.
That is very hard because I know, like you said, we're both parents and you have to be the youngest grandma I've ever seen. So kudos to you. You look great.
Thank you.
You look like grandma.
My oldest is 19. But I can definitely see out the next couple of years.
So I know when I was pregnant, and it's such a joyful experience. It's like, I couldn't wait. I was glowing and I was like so excited. I protected my belly. You know how crazy New York City is, right? So I'd be on the subway and I'd have to keep my arms out in front of me because I didn't want anybody near me bumping into me in crowded elevators. And I could just not imagine, to go from such a beautiful, joyful experience of expecting, this baby to all of a sudden within minutes, something happening in the delivery room in childbirth. And then next thing you know, now you're grieving, you have a life and then it's grief. And it's just too much for the body and your head to take on.
When you have a preventable mistake to take the life of your baby, I don't know how you recover from it. It's heartbreaking. I told you in pre-show, when I do these depositions of families, I barely can function after that. And, as an adversarial proceeding, I'm still a mom. I am still a wife. And one day I'm going to be a grandma and I'm a human. I don't know. And that's why I wrote the book, to spare other families from what I have seen these families endure for 21 years.
Do the women that you're deposing ever have some animosity toward you because you are a woman, you are a mother, and you are on the opposition? You're defending the doctors and the staff and the medical team. I'm just curious about that.
No, as a human, I've always been nice to moms during depositions, probably overly nice. I could not do that as a human. Now, get me in front of a doctor that I don't think's telling the truth, the switch will flip. So I have the adversarial litigator part of me, but for the moms, no, I would never do that. I can't. And my clients will sit in on depositions with me, and they're fine with the way I conduct my depositions. I would never. She's lost her baby, or her baby's brain damaged, or I have a dad whose wife, they have kids and he doesn't have a wife anymore. No, I don't. So if they do have animosity, it's never come out during a deposition, because I am very kind to them. Even though it's an adversarial proceeding, there's no reason to rip mom's head off or be mean with somebody who's going through the grieving process.
No, I'm glad to know that you're very human in that aspect, because I mean, when I was practicing, I came across some cruel, I would say, definitely say cruel attorneys who, even though it's their job, they left their human values outside. And when they went into either the courtroom or into deposing, any of my clients, I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, something, I'm like, it was almost like the robot in them took over.
Yes, that's a great way to get slaughtered in front of a jury, by the way. If you're an attorney listening to that, they watch how you handle people. But anyway, that's that's just the part of me that will never change. But yeah, I've been against those people, and you know what I think in my head? I don't think I'm supposed to swear, but karma is
it's a witch with a W.
okay, well, I'm gonna swear. Karma's, the karma phrase.
Now, when you practice primarily in Michigan,
yes,
have you had any cases that took you outside of Michigan having to deal with childbirth and child death issues?
Oh yeah. We were a national council. So I've had cases actually everywhere, where primarily it's been Michigan. But no. And then I've had to travel the country. I've traveled the country more than once, meeting with doctors. Either they're experts on my cases that are going to undergo a deposition or whatnot. I've had a lot of residents who were in training, who then leave the hospital system, and then they move to wherever they're going to start their life as a doctor. And then I'm traveling out there. So no, I've had cases all over the United States. And then I've traveled, just meeting the different experts, different doctors, nurses, midwives in the field. Yeah. And basically when I'm meeting with these doctors and nurses, we're hashing out basically, I've hashed out every aspect of labor and delivery over the last 21 years. So
what do you think, in your opinion, could be changed in labor and delivery practices for the near future and for the future to either diminish these types of issues or to totally eradicate them, so that women could have a healthy childbirth and delivery?
The ball is in the mom's court on that one. So, and dads. It's preparing for childbirth. Chapter 1 of my book, again, are the lessons learned from baby cases, or I should say, again, as a lesson you're learning from the mistakes. Lesson number 1 is getting ready for childbirth, having that more streamlined communication, just being ready. Because if you're not ready, you're in this like vulnerable state. And you're just making decisions. And are you going to make, in general in life, are you going to make better decisions when you know about something? Or are you going to make better decisions when you don't know about something? It's very basic. But I think the ball is definitely in the parents' court. It could be in the grandparents' court. If someone's a snowflake and they need their mom to step in, or their husband or whatnot, somebody in that labor and delivery room must have an understanding of what's going on. I also am a huge fan of doulas. You find a good doula, they are amazing, and they will prepare you for childbirth. But no, the ball's in the mom's court. I would not leave it to the medical profession. I represent them, and again, it is what it is. But the ball's in the mom and dad's court, 100%.
Well, Gina, while you brought up that topic, can you please explain for our audience what is a doula and how would a pregnant mom go about finding one?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to A doula is somebody okay, you are a doula's client. You're not even their patient. So they are your advocates, advisors. A lot of doulas that are really good have courses and they work with you and they teach you about childbirth. But they have some type of certification. And you know what? They're so different across the country. I mean, I know some amazing doulas, and I'm actually trying to get some of their courses up on my website and some of their podcasts. Like I just had a doula. I was on her podcast and I got to know her. So if you go on my Instagram, you can find the doula and it says Gina approved, like amazing, whatever. But so if you're not getting ready for childbirth, or, you're just focusing on the nursery and the cute clothes and whatnot, then hire a doula, please. And doulas, again, they speak the language of your labor and delivery team. They'll advocate you. They know how to read a baby's heart rate. We haven't talked about this yet, but I had a doctor, testify in the testimonies in the book. The only way a baby can talk to me during labor is through their heart rate. Think about it. Baby's inside you. That's why your doctor, by the way, put an internal monitor in, because that is the most adequate or effective way to, figure out how your baby is going. Well, doulas know all of this stuff. So if you don't read my book, I still recommend hiring a doula and reading my book. But if you don't, please have a doula, again, because she's going to be that educated person that's going to help you make those good decisions. And as we talked about, good decisions really equal, having your healthy baby, and again, not meeting someone like me.
Right. And a doula is not a substitute for a doctor, just so everybody understands that.
Oh, no.
Okay.
This is, they get certifications and whatnot. I did not say this. So I have never had a doula in a childbirth case as a fact witness. So if mom would have even spoken to a doula during her pregnancy, they turn into a fact witness in my case. I've never even had a doula even near a case in 21 years, because they are really helping to bring, babies, into this world healthy by helping parents. And a lot of it, what doula, they educate you during your pregnancy. They tell you what's important. But yeah, definitely you have to find a good doula. And hopefully GinaMundy.com will. Hopefully GinaMundy.com by soon will have some more ones that I recommend.
Right, because I was going to ask if you can please give us your Instagram.
So at Gina Mundy, GinaMundy. But then I have another labor and delivery nurse who is doing a course. And so I've gone through everything with her on her course and stuff like that. So we just had like a thing, and I'm like, okay, Gina Mundy, or 100% Gina approved, actually is what I said. But I'll throw that on there. So maybe there's somebody in your area or whatnot who I have basically vetted out that I think would definitely, help families bring a baby into this world healthy.
No, I really appreciate that, because right now there's some women who I know who are pregnant on their second and third babies through my synagogue, and I would love to get this information out to them. I would like to put this. I want to send your book to everybody to a link in the sisterhood to go and get your book.
Pamela, you are awesome. Thank you, and I know they'll appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely, because something, a healthy baby is a beautiful way to start the life.
Absolutely, it's a very powerful moment, and you never stop being a parent. So it's good to get ready and to have your healthy baby.
And knowledge is power. And this is why I'm so happy I had you on today, because to discuss your book. And again, for anybody who's been tuning in, this has been Gina Mundy with the book, A Parent's Guide to Safer Childbirth.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. I learned so much from you, and I will stay in touch with you. Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.